I'm Lau Miguez, and this is SEO in 2024 Additional Insights.
Lau, what's your additional insight for SEO in 2024?
I think SEOs need to stop focusing on link numbers and start focusing a little bit more on a strategy.
Okay, so why shouldn't you focus on links and link numbers?
I just feel like when we are focusing on links, just link numbers, we are missing out on a lot of other things. I think if you tell a PR, you need to get me X amount of links, and that is your KPI, and that is what you've got in your contract, and you have to actually achieve that number of links. Most of the times we are just going to try to get, those links from publications that are not necessarily the publications we should be going for. We just know we can get the links from those publications. And the same with the topics. We are just going to try to do least risky topics that, might be a great opportunity, but they might be a great risk as well. We need to get those specific number of links, but we are missing out on a strategy. I think the first conversation that needs to happen is, not the number of links or the links itself, but what kind of publications we need to go for, what niches do we need to be targeting, where is our audience, and what topics is our audience interested in? Are we proving that we are a trustworthy brand by doing this type of content? All these things are the things that we need to be thinking about. If we are just focusing on links, we are missing out on all these things. There might be the case, and I've seen it with clients, that 2 links do more, way more than 100 links. That obviously that's something that it's been proven before, but I keep seeing briefs that are just get me 50 links for this campaign. And sometimes, as a PR, you end up just trying to get the links as using the strategy that you shouldn't be using, which is just getting links.
Okay, but so 2 links could be better than 100 links. So that's great, but surely you also needs a consistent building of links, ideally to a page, to demonstrate its continued relevance to search engines and users. So how often should you be adding new links to a page?
I think it really depends. Obviously, I do understand that there should be a consistency, but you can have a consistency by doing, for example, a piece of reactive content or thought leadership piece that's getting you maybe 1 link, but that link is actually giving, I just keep seeing brands producing campaigns that are going exactly to the same publications, getting links in the same publications. And yeah, there's a consistency in that, but there's not really much value there. You're obviously not exploring other niches. Your backlink profile is very specific. There's not really a lot of variety when it comes to links. But also, I just feel like when you're just targeting the same publications all the time, getting the same amount of links, there's not really a strategy there. I think the consistency in terms of achieving links can look different for every client. Some people is you need to kind of produce a certain amount of links, not to just overrank your competitors, but to not fall in terms rankings. So to kind of keep in the same level as you are. So it looks different for every client. Some of the clients are just starting and they are trying to kind of increase their DR. So, the consistency in terms of links might need to be a little bit more often. Yeah, it really depends. And that is the reason you need a strategy. What your kind of success looks like, it might not be the same to yourself and to your competitors or other clients. So if you're looking at your backlink profile, you're looking at other competitors' backlink profile, it might not be the same. And I think that is the reason for a strategy. You can't just say, I want 20 links. Yeah, but why? You might not need them. You might not need 20 links. You might need, to be featured in this specific publication, or you might need to do some thought leadership pieces because what you're lacking in is trust, or what is exactly what you're trying to achieve. And I think then you need to know how many links you need to get, basically.
So you've mentioned that word strategy quite a few times, probably about 5 times there. What does strategy mean to you in terms of how you go about sitting down with clients, discussing objectives and setting what you intend to do for them, and also the end result, the goals that you want to achieve for them?
I just think a strategy is just that. It's just basically listening to your client. Obviously, they know the brand better than you. Nobody knows the brand better. But they sometimes think they need something because, when you see someone doing it and you see agencies sharing, gotten like 100 links for this client and here's how amazing it works. They just think, oh, I need 100 links because this is what it did for this specific brand. So then they come to you and they're like, oh, I've seen that they had 100 links in this campaign and it did these amazing results for them. And you are the one that has to say no. But like that obviously comes from a strategy. So the client sat with the agency and they found out what are the kind of like what specific needs that client has. Sometimes your strategy can be producing one campaign a month, outreaching it to different niches and getting a consistent amount of links. Your strategy might look like doing a lot of reactive activities. So like shorter pieces that are easier and quicker to create that you just send out in the press very consistently every week, for example. Or your strategy might look like just using your existing content to, distribute in the press. Like I just feel like it's just researching what you've got, what your competitors are doing, and where do you want to get to, and then kind of like come up with a plan to get there. And that might not be 100 links. That might be just 2. I always say, like, I had a client in Spain and they were looking to get, obviously, big, like huge national lifestyle links, and we got them. And, obviously that's great. It's great to have them. I'm not saying it isn't. But what actually moved the needle most, it was a really small regional publication whose audience was highly engaged. And we had a lot of not only traffic, but also conversions. And it was a tricky client to get conversions for. So what I mean is like sometimes what for some people is success, for other people, like a small regional publication is not really that successful when it comes to like getting a link, but it's actually what brought us more results. So I think identifying that and using that as a strategy, it is, coming up with a plan that helps you and your objectives.
So in order to identify the ultimate link opportunity, then do you sit down with your client and actually get them to talk through the publications that they'd like to appear on as well?
Yes and no. So I feel like sometimes like there's an element of ego in the publications we want to be featured on, isn't it? Like obviously everyone wants to be featured in like Forbes or like The Guardian. And there's an element of like, not ego, but obviously, it's cool to say I've been featured in The Guardian or in Forbes. But I just feel like it is identifying what are their needs, like in terms of like brand. So obviously sometimes, they come to you and they say, oh, I want these links. But when they are actually talking to you, you can realize they actually don't really want the links. They want the brand awareness that comes with it. So it's like they want to be featured in certain publications because they want people to know about them and they want people to hear about them. So that's where you need to say, actually, in terms of like, we are going to try to get the links, but you can highly benefit from like getting some coverage in like a print publication or even getting some brand mentions. Like it's not necessarily about the links. And obviously brand mentions, well, they are kind of like the links of the future, aren't they? It's a signal of trust that publications are trusting you and your client. So I think that all these things guiding your client through what they actually need, because honestly, the brief of like, I want 20 links is sometimes what we get, and I keep getting it. And sometimes you just have to deal with it and try to get them and try to kind of like jiggle the strategy with the actual getting the amount of links. But whenever I can, I try to avoid a specific amount of links and try to talk to them, see what their objectives are, and then come up with a plan that will help those objectives. And sometimes it's 20 links and sometimes it's 2.
It's hard to measure the value of brand mentions, though. I mean, I think most SEOs would agree with you that brand mentions are valuable for different reasons. But if you sit down with a client and they're used to trying to acquire maybe 20 links a month, and after a conversation with you, they hear that 2 links a month is sufficient alongside brand mentions. How do you make them comfortable with that? How do you sell them into that idea so that they completely agree with you and they want to go ahead with that?
I just think the conversation always starts with when I used to have this conversation and clients used to tell me, yeah, but can you guarantee the links? And I'm like, no. The reason I can't guarantee the links is because this is a completely organic strategy. And as such, I can't guarantee. The only way I can guarantee you a certain amount of links is by buying them. Like that is the only way. I can kind of like give you an idea of a range of links that we can get in a certain amount of time, because that obviously it's within a certain amount of time. So you can use different strategies to get there. So for example, if we were to talk about like a timeline in terms of like 7 months, in those 7 months, we don't have one campaign that if it doesn't work, that is it. we have a few campaigns, then we have a few opportunities for reactive activities, so we can actually compensate one with the other. When we talk about a campaign that has, if a client said to me, is this campaign going to have 10 links? I'd be like, well, I don't know. But then, when they say to you, oh, but there's a risk then that I cannot get anything, so I might as well just buy them. Yeah, but there's also an opportunity. How many campaigns I was like, KPI was around 5-10 links and then they got 40. So there's a risk, but there's also an opportunity to get way more than you would have gotten if you paid for them. And also some publications wouldn't. Obviously, it isn't like a practice that shouldn't be a thing, but it is still a thing sometimes. And I keep hearing it. And not only that, there's campaigns that produced 2 years ago. They're still getting links and coverage still nowadays. And that is the kind of like importance of a strategy. That campaign didn't get links from day one. It didn't get 100 links from like week 2. But it is a campaign that is consistently in 2 years. That was 2 years ago. And it's kind of like outdated a little bit. Still nowadays, it's getting links in like huge publications. And, that is the opportunity. I think it's like sometimes we need patience. We have to be thinking about a long-term strategy and not just the now. If you're looking to get 10 links now, I think the best way to go is just buy them, because digital PR is not, you know what I mean? Yes, you can get links with digital PR. Yes, you can get immediate links with digital PR, but that shouldn't be our thought. Our thought should be what content that we want to be creating, what publications do we want to be targeting, and what is our long-term strategy. And then the rest will come on its own. Because if you have really good content and you have a strategy, there might be a campaign that is not getting you any links. But in the long term, you'll consistently get a good amount of links.
You mentioned KPIs there. What metrics do you use to measure the effectiveness of the services that you provide?
I think it really depends again with the client. And this is something that you cannot, you can try to educate the client in terms of like what is working for them or whatever. But I just feel like if you're working as a digital PR with a client, the best thing you can do is listen to them. And sometimes, even though I've been saying, obviously, don't focus on links, but if the client wants links, that's what you need to give them. That's what you need to focus on. The KPIs look very different. So I work with clients. My KPIs are like brand mentions and seeing, kind of like it's not really that, it's quite lax, thankfully, because I love it. I really like this strategy, but it's kind of seeing how many times we get mentioned in publications like consistently. So 2-3 years ago when we started working together, it was effort to get a journalist to kind of like talk about us, whereas now we've got journalists from like huge lifestyle publications in Spain coming to us. That is how we measure success. We achieved a moment where we actually don't have to do as much distribution, producing as much content, because journalists will come to us and will ask us to, kind of like provide like a quote or like an interview for them. That is great. That is success. That is what for me success looks like with that client. For another client, that would be useless, because I know other clients, if you said to them, we got you an interview, they'd be like, no, like I don't have time for that. Where's my link? So it really depends, really varies from client to client.
You mentioned journalists there and how journalists perhaps weren't so keen to engage with you a couple of years ago. Has the way that you go about actually offering your services and building links as a result of doing that changed over the last couple of years?
No. So I think journalists are like audience. So we are talking about users, and we are constantly talking, especially now, about trust. We are constantly using the word trust and quality of content. And journalists just want the same. If you start as a brand and you start producing spammy content constantly, you might get a bit like quick results, quick wins. But in the long term, people will be like, they'll see you as a bit of a spammy brand. And the same happens with PR. When we started, we weren't getting the immediate results or like the 100 links per campaign that everyone talks about and all of this, but we were producing consistent, good quality content that is really trustworthy in terms of like data-led campaigns, data that was really valuable and trustworthy. And within time, that kind of like sank into journalists. So now they trust not only obviously our campaigns, but also the brand, which is really important. When imagine that you're a journalist and you're trying to find like a source to include in your article. The main thing is that you trust the person and what they are saying. You trust that is valuable and trustworthy kind of like content. So I think it's the same. When we are outreaching to journalists, we need to be thinking about the same, that when we are producing content for people, we need to build that kind of like relationship of trust. And that's why I said, that is why a strategy is so important, because, if you send something to a journalist, it's kind of like a really quick story that doesn't have like a lot of like much to it. You'll get a quick win, but in the long term, you won't be getting anywhere.
You've shared what SEO should be doing in 2024, so now let's talk about what SEO shouldn't be doing. So what's something that's seductive in terms of time, but ultimately counterproductive? What's something that SEO shouldn't be doing in 2024?
I think it is very similar to what I was saying. In terms of time, really quick wins and all of these, you can get X amount of links doing this piece of content. But I think, if we stop thinking about those quick wins and we think about long-term strategy, focus on like less on links and more like planning what we need to achieve and how to get there.
Lau Miguez is a freelance international digital PR strategist, and you can find her over at laumiguez.com. Lau, thanks so much for adding your additional insight to SEO in 2024.
Thank you.
I've been your host, David Bain. You've been listening to an episode of SEO in 2024 Additional Insights, a Majestic series that complements the original SEO in 2024 podcast, video series and book. Find out more at SEOin2024.com.